Thank you very much. Thank you, Phil. And I as well, I'm a big fan of Phil and his talks. Um, I've mentioned this to him, I think, in public as well, probably even on Twitter. So thank you very much, Phil. So I'm going to, I believe, share my deck, but let me see. Let me hit play on my, and if I do this, and if I do that, uh, is my deck visible? Am I even sharing it?
No,
Now
it's
that I
not
think.
sharing yet.
Okay, hold on. How would I do that here? Hold on. Bingo. Remember, okay, that's set. Where am I? Might be lost here. Hold on.
Oh, you're looking at it. There's a little TV that's X'd out.
Oh, yeah, I see it now. Sorry, my bad. Share. Bingo. And I believe it's sharing now. And now we should be good. Are we seeing something now? Yes?
Except you're seeing the presenter view. So can you press the X button for me?
The X button. Okay, hold on. Where's the X button?
The X key.
Oh, X key. Bingo. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Apologies, folks. This is technology at work.
Fun of doing this live.
Yeah. Okay, so what do you see now?
It's not playing yet. So if you press.
Oh, okay. Now it's playing.
Yeah,
okay,
now press the letter X.
X.
Perfect.
There we go. Are we good? Okay. A million apologies, folks. I just wasted 5 minutes, or actually 4 minutes and 55 seconds of your time. So I'll try to reclaim it as quickly as possible. With that being said, good morning for some of you, and good afternoon, Dom, for the rest. This is just a little tradition that I have. You know, I try to have fun on the internet, as you know. First of all, I realized you could do anything on a Friday, and you chose to be with us here at SmashingConf live. It's been a great couple of days so far, so hopefully you'll stick around for the rest of the great talks, including mine, of course. So with that being said, let me get the formalities aside. Hello, my name is Henri. Henri Helvetica is my Instagram handle. It's my Twitter handle, of course. It is not my real last name. It's in non plume. I hail from the greatest city on the planet, which is Toronto, Canada, home of the world champ Toronto Raptors. Thank you very much. One thing about Canada, and this comes back to what Phil was saying, it is where Commodore was founded. So anyone who played around with the Commodore 64 and all the other variants, they're founded in Toronto. And in fact, Commodore platform is the one I used to play some games, the few games that I did play. So, and I can't even remember what they're called, but I mean, that's my gamer answer. That being said, I also want to mention that Toronto is home of one of the greatest Caribbean festivals on the planet. It's called Caravana. Obviously, it's not happening this year, or it did not happen. It would have been in August, but hopefully we'll get to experience it next year. And that's that. So the last thing I wanted to mention, you'll see the hashtag at the bottom, hashtag devs who run. I am a distance runner, specifically 5 and 10K race-wise, but I do share my runs online with this hashtag specifically because I'm trying to see more designers and developers sort of get healthy. And especially in this pandemic we're experiencing, I think for me, it was a great outlet for me to sort of like clear my head and things like that. Now, the formalities have been brushed aside. Let's get right into it. So yesterday we heard from, I believe her name was Nadi, and she was an astronomer. And I remember thinking of when she mentioned that I'm a big fan of space imagery and whatnot. And from time to time, I go through the NASA images of the day. Here you can see the Mars rover. But a very interesting thing is that NASA developed their own image format called VICAR, and it stands for Video Image Communication and Retrieval. It was designed by the NASA Jet Propulsion Labs. I thought it would be an interesting little tidbit for the curious people out there. Another thing I want to mention, as yesterday when we got the everything going, Vitaly asked everyone to share some pics. So I'm calling them smashing pics. So we had some cute pictures. We have this little kitty cat here. We had this other one here. Kitty cat was sort of like behind the screen. And he had another one just dozing away. Pretty interesting. There were 17 pictures there. Would you believe they totaled 64 megabytes, which comes out to about 3.75 megs each? They're rather large. Just remember that because I'm going to come back to that little later on today. With that being said, welcome to my presentation. I'm calling it Moving Pictures. It's really a bit of a short story about the future of web media. Now, obviously, it's a bit of a double entendre, if you don't mind me saying. Moving pictures, because actually moving photography pictures across the net is actually a little complicated. And we're going to talk about moving pictures in the sense that we will discuss video and how it's making its way across the net as well, and making our work a little harder. So let's start this little story. And our story starts literally on the internet, of course, and that should be no surprise to anyone here. But specifically, it started February 1993 at the National Center of Supercomputing and Applications in Illinois. That's in America, yes. And where a group of engineers were basically working on what would become one of the first successful commercial browsers, which was Mosaic. And in a conversation, there was a proposal to introduce a new HTML tag, which was IMG, image. And it went a little something like this, the email, that is. I'd like to propose a new optional HTML tag, IMG image. That was by Mark Andreessen, Thursday, February 25th, 1993. And that's the actual timestamp. Would you believe that was 10,039 days ago? Kind of crazy. Either way, it was about images. Now, let's stop for a second, really think about this, because now in 2020, the net without images is literally inconceivable. And at the time in 1995, the internet was really simply text. It was almost pretty much like an academic platform. And in fact, you know, the idea of images was not something that Tim Berners-Lee was very crazy about. But Mark Andreessen knew that somehow it would probably push the web and maybe potentially some innovation. But one of the main concerns was that there might be some unsavory content traveling across the web. Well, let's see if that happened. Nah, it couldn't have happened. Anyhow, we knew that, or at least Mark really knew that experimentation would take place by introducing images. So with that being said, HTML 2.0 in 1995 introduced the IMG tag, the image tag, and we were off and running. Now, this is going to be a talk about images, image formats, and some video as well. So it'd be impossible to really start this without having a bit of a retrospective. So let's look back and look at some of these formats. Well, I say look back, but they're really present with us today. Now, yes, I'm going to say it. Brace yourself. The GIF, graphic interchange format, is actually 33 years old. Now, one of the earlier formats to come out by Steve Wilhite, by the way, it's a lossless format, believed to really carry 256 colors, although it did more. But at the time, a lot of the monitors that were available, pardon me, could only do so much. It had transparency, not alpha, so it was either transparent or not. Obviously, it had some kind of animation that we love today. It was a bit of an older codec. And to this very day, that codec pretty much remains the same. And one of the challenges with the GIF that I'll talk about a little later was that it had a patent. Now, we're also going to talk about the PNG, the portable network graphic. Now, that is 23 years old. It was actually in part a reply to the patent issues that were taking place with the GIF. The PNG had an alpha channel, which was great. Again, a not transparency. Here you could have gradient transparency. This was also a lossless format, which made it a bit of a big format to work with. Obviously, in greater right now in greater amounts, than the GIF on the internet. So it is still kind of a good format, but again, it is lossless, so it tends to be on the heavier side. And something that I know Vitaly reminded me of last time, and I'm going to share with you here again. Ping at one point playfully meant for PNG is not GIF. Ding, 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 ding. Anyhow, so yes, the PNG is around. Now, obviously, it'd be impossible to talk about image formats without talking about the JPEG, the actual workhorse of the of image formats on the internet. Stands for Joint Photographic Expert Group. Actually, it's 27 years old and turns 28 next month, and I'm going to talk about that as well a little later. Now, the JPEG has many variants. The one that we know, obviously, is the one that comes out of cameras, and JPG, JPEG, but it's got a JPEG XR. There's a JPEG 2000. Again, I won't get too much into those details, but as long as you know. But the good part about the JPEG is that it was a lossy format. So you could actually get a little bit of compressed images, and that was starting to really come into factor, especially when you wanted to send images down the wire or anywhere across the net. So yes, it started to address the need for smaller file sizes, obviously meant for photographs, and it's the main format coming out of most of the smartphones that we have today. And yeah, so the other thing that I'd like to talk to you about is the Webp. Now, believe it or not, the Webp is only 10 years old, maybe about 11 later on this year. But it is the quote-unquote youngster of the crew, based on VP8 codec. It is lossy and lossless, quite often smaller than the JPG and the PNG. Offers some transparency, offers some animation, which people absolutely love. And it actually also has this thing we're calling chroma subsampling, which is set at 420. Now, specifically what that means is that, well, first of all, what I'd like to say about the Webp is that it was actually made for the internet specifically. It addresses a lot of the needs that we had when it came to sending images down the wire. So it was really built just for that. Also wanted to mention that it was locked in at 8 bits as well. But with regards to this chroma subsampling, what that means is that it's actually removing some image data that's really that the eye can't really perceive. So by removing some of that data, we're actually able to have a bit of a smaller size as well. So 420 is something that was built for the internet. Now, combine those 4 images, kind of look like this. 4 old men. They've been around for quite a while, probably as long as the Rolling Stones. But essentially, they're older formats featuring older codecs. And what happens that with age and with older codecs, you have certain concerns. And the concerns are something like this. You're looking at costs because, well, I'm going to get into that in a hot minute. You're also looking at congestion across the net. And also, like I said, these codecs are a little long in the tooth, so you might not be getting the efficiencies that you need. They were made in an era of low-powered computing, and there were limited resources at the time. I love this image, but I think it really describes everything that is necessary in compression. You do not want artifacts. You want the best image possible, and with the way images are sort of being shot these days, we have to get the best compression. And in fact, I love this quote right here, which is, image compression is critical to digital photography. Without it, a 12 megapixel image would take 36 megabytes of storage, making most websites prohibitively large. And that's absolutely true. And in fact, I love this quote right here from Colt McCandless, a Google engineer. He says, the foundation of the whole internet is data compression. Now, there are no words truer. You're talking about anything that's going down the wire on the net has to be compressed, whether it be text files or images, at some point, compression is required. Now, why is that? Well, bandwidth, and bandwidth is absolutely important. And it's never been more important than really this year. It's been exposed in terms of the need to have compressed files at all times. And why is that? Well, really, this is what happened. And we're talking about COVID-19, the pandemic. Essentially, overnight, we were asked to work from home. We were asked to learn from home, and we're asked to conference from home like we are doing right now. In fact, some of you may remember this. It came out in various publications, but some of the larger platforms that use video, or at least heavily involved in bandwidth consumption, YouTube, Netflix, and etc., they're asked to cut the quality of their streams, basically knowing that the future, the rest of the potentially summer was going to involve a lot of bandwidth usage. And essentially, some companies like Netflix specifically responded. And in a blog post that I'll actually share the link to, they mentioned that we immediately developed, tested, and deployed a way to reduce Netflix traffic on these networks by 25%, starting with Italy, Spain, which were experiencing the biggest impacts. So some of you may remember some of the hot zones through Europe, and obviously there was, or is still, what's going on in America. And in fact, Fastly, a CDN, was keeping an eye on some of this traffic. And you can see right here, all these 7 territories were experiencing spikes in bandwidth, and with only 2 experiencing little to no download speed changes, or upgrades anyways. And everyone else essentially here, as you can tell from this chart, was experiencing some slower downloads. And that was a 6-week period ending in March of 2020. Now, you might ask yourself, why am I including a shot of the Tokyo 2020 Olympics? Well, let's talk about it very quickly. We are spending a lot of time watching video. And, what we would consider a good video stream is, say, 1080p. Cool. Just a reminder that 4K is actually 4 times the data of a 1080p stream. All right, so now we're starting to talk big numbers. Well, the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, 2021 now, are going to be streaming in 8K. So that's going to be 4 times a 4K stream, which is essentially going to be 16 times a 1080p stream. So we are talking about massive costs, and this is why compression is needed. And as I mentioned, with costs involved, we need somehow cheaper video. And with video and costs, we had patent issues, which is why some of you may remember, I guess it was last year or 2 years ago, when Apple introduced HEIF and HEVC. I personally thought this was probably going to, go places, but it was essentially held back by patent issues and royalties. And there are things that we have to consider as well. Screen resolution is very important in this sort of decision making, in this sort of research around image formats and video, simply because it is actually a great indicator of a device's capabilities. Quite often, when you have like moderate to small screens, you probably have a moderate to low power device, and the other way around as well. And keeping that in mind, and I mean, I know Smashing is based out of Germany, so I just had a quick shot of what the device split is like in Germany. It's a 80% mobile world. So these are things that you want to keep in mind with some of these new formats, whether it be on the video or still image size, because there is complexity involved with some of these newer formats. Let's look at some quick data here. So for example, here we have total image bytes per web page. And you can see at the median, it is 1 megabyte. And this is on mobile, by the way. At P75, it's 235. Now, think about that. Earlier today, or earlier in my talk, I mentioned that some of the images that everyone was sharing in the Slack, the average was about 375 megs. And here we have, on a whole, across the web, it's anywhere from 1 to 235, from P50 to 75. So we do have a propensity to have large images and share large images. And if we start to look at the image format split across the web, once again, I'd mentioned that the JPEG is a bit of the workhorse. You can see here from this chart. By the way, this data is taken from the http archive.org. You can go and check out some of the data there yourself. Really interesting site. So we're looking at JPEGs, PNGs, WebPs, and GIFs, and seeing that the JPEGs are most abundant format, they can also provide the most abundant amount of savings. So let's talk about the future of images. And here we go. Who here has heard of the JPEG XL? It's a brand new format. It's not actually out in the wild yet, but the experimentation and the research is taking place as we speak. Now, the JPEG XL, how did it start? Well, about 2 years ago, or almost 3 now, on the 25th anniversary of the JPEG, there was a call for papers. 7 submissions were made, 2 were selected, pardon me. 1 was PIC and 1 was FWIF. Now, PIC was actually a project by Google. They had been working on what they felt was going to be a replacement for the JPEG, again, realizing that the JPEG was a little long in a tooth. FWIF was actually a project by a company called Cloudinary. FWIF stands for Free, I think, Unlimited Image Format, something along those lines, but also was designed by a set of researchers, and they also felt that the image ecosystem needed something updated. They ended up combining forces, pardon me, again, they ended up combining forces and creating what would be the JPEG XL. Now, why was the JPEG XL created? Well, some of the features that they wanted to see in one format were the following. Obviously, an alpha channel, lossless capabilities, animation, which is obviously extremely important these days. It just seems to have like a great UX. Modern compression, again, that is very key because you're talking about older formats with older codecs. Often were created in a time of low computing power. So this would take advantage of the higher computing power that we have and better efficiencies. Obviously, you want this to be as responsive as possible, high bit depth for color, legacy friendly. So it's going to be backwards compatible, pardon me. And it was actually going to be universal. Universal meaning that the goal is to have one format to replace every format out there. So meaning you may have a situation where you might want to use a, I don't know, SVG. Well, they plan on having the best features from the SVG into this format right here and so forth. So it's almost going to be like a Swiss Army knife, really. So that was the JPEG XL. Now, I like to spend a little bit of time talking about video and how video has become extremely important in this new sort of world that we're in right now, especially now. Now, looking at some HTTP archive data, once again, you can see that at the lowest end, so at P10, half the content on a page is media. So it could be any kind of mix of images and video. And at P75, you're up in the 80% range. So just to show you that the importance of media is growing on the daily basis. I once again bring back the quote from Colt McCandless, which is the foundation of the whole internet is absolutely data compression. So let's look at some information on the video side. Here by Cisco, global video traffic will be 82% of all IP traffic, both business and consumer, by 2022, up from 75% in 2017. Now, this is probably predating the pandemic, and I believe there's been a accelerated shift towards this kind of towards these kind of figures, if they've not been surpassed already. Now, another bit of information from Google: since 2017, traditional linear TV viewership of the Super Bowl, a massive event, is down 14%, while digital streaming increased by 200% from 1.3 to 2.6 million in with 7.4 million in 2020. People are very accustomed. It's user behavior that is also driving some of this innovation that we need. People love to watch content through non-traditional means. And this is just not a North American phenomenon. This past summer, for a cricket match in India, we had 25 million concurrent viewers on mobile devices. That is a quote from the CEO of Akamai, one of the premier CDNs in the world, by their CEO, Dr. Tom Layton. So these are things that are being taken into consideration all the time. Let's look at the video landscape very quickly. So H.264, which has been with us for quite a while, in fact, I'd say since about 2003. H.265 is the one that I mentioned, which was HEVC. And then you also had things like VP8, VP9, and VP10. And I'm going to put a little asterisk next to that and talk about that in a hot minute. Now, VP8, VP9 are properties of Google, which actually came from a company that was acquired. But now we have something a bit more interesting and much more important. It is called the Av-1. Now, Av-1 is a collaboration that was set up by the Alliance for the Open Media. Now, this alliance was set up to address what I talked about earlier, which was the patent issues that were burdening some formats. And with patents and expenses, you potentially have, or at least you handcuff innovation. Now, this alliance is being supported by companies that have very much vested interest in seeing this happen. Cisco, Netflix, YouTube, well, Google, YouTube, Facebook, Amazon, everyone's got sort of like a video platform now. So they have interest in making sure that they can get an incredible format with high fidelity at the lowest cost possible. And then you also have some supporting sponsors here as well. Now, I mentioned YouTube. Let's talk about YouTube. Why would this be so important to YouTube? Well, 1 billion hours of YouTube are watched every day. 500 hours are uploaded every minute. And to throw an added wrench, we're talking about 70% mobile clients. That's excessive. Now, I'm not a huge gamer, as I'd mentioned, so apologies. But Twitch has been an incredible platform, and their viewership on top of streaming is also through the roof. Now, in May, 1.755 billion hours were watched, 2.3 million concurrent views that month. And that's mostly desktop. So once again, you have these sort of like swinging pendulum of cases that we have to take in consideration. And if that wasn't enough, who's had like, what do they call it? Zoom gloom? From Zoom, Google Hangouts, Meets, Duo, WebEx, GoToMeetings, Teams, FaceTime, etc. We are living in an era of intense and excessive, if not video streaming. So again, the argument to have a proper codec with good compression is at hand. So let's talk about the Av-1 codec. It is an amalgam of three projects that were taking place concurrently. VP10, which is why I gave it that little asterisk. They folded that into the work that was being done by Mozilla with Dala and Cisco's other project called Thor. And that became essentially what AV1 is today. Now, AV1 did not come without any challenges. When it comes to images and even video, especially, there are some complexities involved. So software recording gets a little complicated, but the goal is to have the efficiencies go through the roof and the complexities be as close to the floor as possible. Now, why is this important? Well, let's get back to YouTube. And they were starting to dabble in releasing some AV1 content, which is actually out there right now. But in doing so, they found out that 10% of their clients were 12 years old or older. So imagine releasing some content right now and knowing that about 10% of your users are going to be on the very first iPhone that was released. Not the most interesting of ideas, but this is the kind of data that we have to work with, or they have to work with. Apologies. Facebook has been playing around with this as well, releasing some AV1 content no longer than 5 minutes and at 720p, so something relatively manageable for devices. And they have about this 80% mobile client user base. So they've been actually playing around with some of this material, and again, unknowingly, you may have been streaming some of it right now. As I'd mentioned, AV1 is basically something to look out for. Why? Well, you can see here from this slide, Firefox is supporting it. It's behind a flag, I believe, right now. And if you're on Chrome, or I believe anything powered by Blink, you'll be able to see on YouTube, you actually have an opportunity to play some AV1 content by default, if it's available. And you could go into your settings and see that right now. Now, that is the video side of AV1. But would you believe that AV1 is also creating a format, an image format called AVIF? And that is their image file format. Now, the benefits of the AVIF are going to be as follows: 8, 10, and 12-bit capable, lossy and lossless capabilities, obviously an alpha channel HDR, and the chroma subsampling is going to go from anywhere from 420, 422 to 444, which means that you're going to have very much additional fidelity that you say you wouldn't be able to get out of a Webp. Now, at current, the AVIF is providing some good results, and actually some of the best results out there, if you don't mind me saying. If anyone could tell me what the connection is between Webp, Heath, and AVIF, I will give them a high five in the chat, but I'll get to that in a hot minute. But what I'm showing here is basically some of the experimentation and some data coming out about the AVIF, and showing that we are getting some of the better savings out there. This slide is here to show you that it is being worked on as we speak to add to Chrome Stable. It's a bug that you can actually track, and I have some news about that a little later in my talk. Now, we looked at the Jpeg Excel. We looked at the AV1 video format. We also just touched on the AVIF image format, which is born out of AV1. Now let's talk about the future. Now, believe it or not, Webp2 is being worked on as we speak. And that's going to address some of the shortcomings that the Webp experienced. Again, across a 10-year period, a lot of things can change. And what they're going to try to do is address things like the bit depth, obviously probably a better compression, because as you can tell, the AVIF is getting better numbers, and a few other items that that would be just naturally addressed in image fidelity. Now, as much as the AV1 is barely even supported or is just about to roll out, AV2 is also being worked on as we speak. And there's some documentation about that a little later. Now, I have these two other formats here on the video side, VVC and EVC. So versatile video coding and essential video coding. The only challenge that I see with these two as we speak is that they're video formats that may be burdened by patent issues. We'll see what happens, but it just seems like that right now, as we speak, there is a consensus that AV1 is the one that should be pushed forward, and it's being supported by the what seems to be the entire community, including Apple. I have to throw that in. I'm still a Safari user default. Now, Guillermo from Vercel spoke yesterday, and he had a couple interesting quotes that I liked a lot. So I'm going to sort of go back and mention these in my talk, which is the world is certainly getting more complex, and that includes with video and image formats. What was seemingly a fairly easy decision making that was taking place, say, 5 to 10 years ago, JPEGs, PNGs, GIFs, has turned into a bit of like a sort of a Macedon of media, and making these decisions is getting a little harder. We are certainly trying to speed things up, and we're trying to do less at the same time. Speeding things up by having much better processing, much better and efficient codecs, and so that this media can get down the wire as fast as possible. But at the same time, we're trying to just do as little as possible. So that might mean that we might want to offload some of this decision making through some logic, through some services like Cloudinary, Imagix, or whatnot. What we don't want is what he called this choice paralysis, which, you know, it does take a little bit of time to figure out what to use at times. You know, what kind of image is it? Okay, what's your user base like? Do I have a lot of people on Safari? Okay, that means I might not be able to use Webp. I don't know. So there's some challenges involved in handling media. I think it's really a lot of fun to sort of like read about and see what's going on and see what some of these brilliant engineers are doing out there to try to make things as easy as possible for us. Now, in conclusion, essentially what I want to say is that has never been more important. Compression has never been more important. Efficiency has never been more important as well. Because again, in this current climate, we have seen it happen right before our eyes. The pandemic hit, we were forced to essentially shelter in place. Some started to work again, sheltered in place. And then, you know, it became Zoom Central. You know, what I called at one point Zoom fatigue. It was meeting after meeting after meeting, and it was all video meeting, bandwidth intensive, you know, 4 or 5 people all at a time, etc. So with that being said, I just believe there's a lot of good to look forward to. Like I said, I think it's extremely interesting what is taking place and what some of these brilliant engineers are doing. In the words of the famous Steve Jobs, one more thing. Now, we talked about the present, and in the present day, we talked about the Webp and its availability. It's about 10 years old. It's the youngster of the group. And it's currently supported by this group of fine browsers: Edge, Explorer, Firefox, Samsung, Chrome, of course, et cetera, et cetera. But some of you who are quite erudite will remember that 4 years ago, literally, there was this weird kerfuffle at Apple where they actually supported the WebP for about a week. And apparently this was a mistake and it was pulled right away. Some believe that someone probably got fired. But how things change. And 4 years later, this happened. Jen Simmons, having joined Apple, had the honors to announce that iOS 14 was going to support WebP. And there seemed to be some kind of jubilation online for that. And in fact, someone I respect extremely well, very much, pardon me, and whose work has been stellar in the image compression community, Cornell, who works, I believe, at Cloudflare, Yi of Image Optim, feels that now that Safari supports WebP, that next year it might be feasible to only serve WebP on the internet. Something worth considering. And in fact, to add an extra wrinkle, this was announced last week by Cornell, and he keeps an eye on these things. And I retweeted this today, that AVIF image format is coming to Chrome next week, which is probably going to be, I think it's behind a flag. It might be in Canary right now, but I'll double check. But that's going to be also very important in the future of web media. So what do we have? We have WebP that's being supported by iOS 14. That means that the few little red dots across this line are going to go green. So WebP is something you certainly do want to consider now. And the last thing I do want to mention, or second last, is would you believe CSS is also involved in data management? Now, it's not only for just engineers. I believe in media query level 5, you're going to see something like prefers reduce data. And this is going to detect whether the user has made a request for some content that might consume less data on their device. And this is something that, again, experimental as we speak, but something worth certainly considering or to keep in mind in future endeavors with media. And with that being said, I want to thank everyone for listening. And the last statement I'm going to make is the following. September 18th is the Jpeg's anniversary, and I believe it turns 28. I am planning a one-day sort of like 3 or 4 hour event where I'm going to invite a lot of compression engineers, media people to talk about what's happening in the space. And I'll provide details on my Twitter account. With that being said, that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Oh, thanks so much, Henri. Thanks for a great talk.
Man, thanks, Phil. Oh, thanks. I it was still a little weird. I'm like, okay, I think I'm talking to people, and
yes,
the whole time I didn't ask whether or not I was sharing the correct screen, because I was like, what if I'm sharing the screen with my notes right now? I'll be screwed.
I did that last week at an internal presentation at work, and it was a few minutes in before someone said, Phil, we can see exactly what's coming up. So it's easily done. But no, you absolutely were being received loud and clear by people. I certainly saw lots of chatter going on in the various chats. So that's good. So a reminder for folks, I will keep an eye on the chat here in the session in Hopin and also in the live channel in Slack. So don't be shy if you want to chime in with more questions as well. But I've got one to kick us off, Henri.
Sure, dude.
And that is it really okay that you were just making up words in that talk? Because you had pick, you had fweef, you had chip. These are all just made up nonsense words, right? That's what
I know, right? I wish they were, So it's it's really funny because the pick one just kind of it was just kind of like quietly out there, and I don't think it ever went anywhere before, not even just any kind of articles, whereas Fweef actually had been discussed in various blogs, specifically, I think, on the Cloudinary side, because it came from like John Snyder. I forget. I can't remember pronounce his last name, but that had been sort of circling, but it quickly died off once that sort of merger took place. So it was no, it was pretty interesting to discover.
Yeah, for sure. So a little bit more seriously than making fun of the names. First of all, I can't believe that Webp is 10 years old. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And as you kind of mentioned, it's getting more it's more ubiquitous and what have you. But do you think, I mean, as developers, do we need to care a lot about the format that we're publishing in? I mean, is there still like a burden of effort on us to either pick the right format or deliver the format that's going to work, or can things help us to take care of that, do you think?
I mean, that's a great question, and it's been an ongoing debate. There was a time where it absolutely was essential to really know what to use. So I don't know if you're an F1 fan.
A little, yeah.
A little bit, okay.
Yep,
so
yep.
It's just one of those days. It's one of those situations where, okay, well, I have a race today. What's the sky look like? Okay, what are the roads like? And they have their different tires depending on the conditions. And I think at one point with the images, I really believe that was necessary. Where you might say, okay, I'm looking at a logo here. Chances are it's probably going to be a PNG or an SVG. And then you start to make your decision from there. Now a little less. There are services out there that kind of really take that lifting out of your hands. But I still believe that, first of all, not everyone is going to be using, some of these services to their full potential, because you probably have costs involved. So with that being said, I always believe it never hurts to really have a good idea of what you're faced with. And knowing that, it's like, hey, you know what, I could probably make that an SVG, that might be pretty good as a ping. It might still take a little bit of testing and figuring out massaging, but it doesn't hurt to really know what you have to do essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And it sounds like Webp sounds like it's quite a good all-rounder. From what I understand,
Absolutely.
And with its
Absolutely.
wider support, I mean, you kind of teased us a little bit at the end and saying, so maybe we can just start just using Webp. Are there techniques that we currently have that could allow us to use Webp a lot and then deal with browsers that aren't capable of handling Webp, or I'm thinking about like trailing edge of browsers and those kind of things.
Yeah. I mean, it's been around with us for quite a while, and the Webp or the images situation has been very interesting because, as late as a couple of days ago, and I could probably find the tweet, someone saying that they can't use Webp yet because it's not supported in Safari, and I'm like, but dude, like in my head I was saying this, I'm like, but dude, like there's like so many other browsers that can support it, so why would you not add like 3 or 4 lines of code, specifically the picture tag that's been around forever and ever and ever. In SourceSet, you've been able to sort of provide the correct format for whatever needs may be at the time. And again, you can even go further and go the services route, like I mentioned, Akamai. I remember maybe 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, presenting and showing people that the same website under different clients was giving me a JPEG, a Webp, and a JPEG 2000. So right. The opportunities were there. Now, on our side as developers, without the services, the code blocks start to get out of hand. And that's where it became less and less attractive to do the kind of work, which is where, again, these companies that are literally there just to handle this for you. I think it's a testament to the amount of media that we're consuming and the complications that are coming about with that kind of work that needs to be done.
Yeah. And you touched on that a little bit during your talk as well. I know you also mentioned Cloudinary as an example of, you know, a service that will do like image transformation on the fly, and so, you know, you can get it to serve in whichever format's appropriate for the browser. And I know that it can do all kinds of crazy transformations. How I was always nervous. I'm much less nervous now, I think, but I was always nervous about like offloading some of these capabilities to an other service that lives on some CDN. But I think the fact that these services are becoming much more approachable to us kind of regular developers rather than someone who's at a huge enterprise with a gazillion-dollar budget. But how comfortable are you with saying, well, we'll just give a service such as Cloudinary or some other service that'll transform things on the fly, all of your source images, and they'll just serve things for you, whatever you need? Do you think that's a reasonable approach, or are there any downsides to that, or is it feel safe enough?
I mean, the only challenge would be, as you lay all your eggs in one basket, whatever happens to them happens to your eggs, right?
Right.
But that aside, I don't believe that this is something that you necessarily want to manually take on, because again, that's just the sort of I mean, they have several services available, but let's take just the compression and image size out of it. Machine learning is coming through and cropping the image properly for you, and these are things that you would sit there and be like, how am I going to crop this one here? Okay, yeah, I see the face. This is going to be on mobile. So, they're providing services well beyond some of the work that we want to do, we could do, but, hold on, where are my notes here? I remember Guillermo said something that I liked a lot, between like the whole choice paralysis and what did he have here? Things are getting complex. Like, you really want to start to offload some of this work. You want to make it as smooth and easy as possible. And if the services are out there for you to use, I mean, worth giving it a shot.
Yeah, totally. And it's funny. I was kind of thinking along the same lines as well, because I'm someone who's advocates for offloading some of these specialist services and using APIs and what have you. And we covered that in our chat with Guillermo. Yeah, certainly. But it's weird, for some reason in my mind, it's like, well, like a big operational service is one thing, some kind of big transactional thing, but in terms of just transforming assets, that should be part of my build and what have you. And there's something kind of traditional in me that thinks, well, no, I should make those assets. But that's just as much of a contender for huge amounts of complexity and a landscape that's changing all the time, as you've kind of highlighted, in terms of what codecs there are, what browser support there is. So I guess why not kind of offload that to a service, I suppose.
Absolutely. And again, I just bring up this is not, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is not what do you call that, oh my god, what do they call it, I'm blanking out, that classifieds ad, that website. Why am I blanking out?
I don't know. Oh no, now I'm curious. I'm still thinking of the wizard. Craigslist is
yes, Craigslist. That's it.
Thank you. Everyone in the comments are doing their job. I love it.
So you know what I mean? So this is not Craigslist. This is not text. This is not, just a link. Right. This is just, images, and even Craigslist now, people will not buy a product without a proper image. I recently actually sold a camera to someone on the Canadian Craigslist. It's called Kijiji. And I mean, we were sort of discussing the features, and he was like, dude, I saw every photo, it was perfect. He really didn't have that many, questions outside of like, does it work? Because the pictures were excellent. So it's this is how we communicate now. It's super important. And like I said, in the background, the engineers are doing everything they can to save all the data. I could go in to talk about the whole classic feather project by Chris Zacharias. This is like 10 years ago, in fact, when he was trying to get YouTube to play properly in emerging markets. And we are having this situation take place before our eyes right now. You leave major metros in any place on the planet and you start to go into sort of like rural areas. It's the struggle with the internet, and it's going to be the struggle with the product that they have to come down the wire.
Absolutely. And kind of on that's a great moment, I think, to turn to one of the questions that is in this the session in the chat. And Oti's asking, for what are the newest tips on reducing like page and image and file size, because that's something that seems to keep evolving, doesn't it? Like the latest advice about how to are there places that you go first for, okay, these are the things that I'll do to try and squeeze the page weight?
So I'm going to quote the great Phil Hawksworth, who has this who has this line. It goes something like this: the most secure server is the one that doesn't exist.
Yes. Yeah.
So the most compressed image is the one you don't need. So I'll tell you honestly, I think you start to take a look at your page, and it's like, what is necessary here? And you may think like, oh man, this picture is so good because I love this angle and the shadowing here is good. It may provide little to no good to whatever you're working on. Now, with that being said, you start to look at the image. If it's going to be photography, you're down to like 2 or 3 formats only, because I actually personally believe that lossless formats don't belong on the internet. Now maybe there's an argument because a lossless format combined with a good codec might give you a good size, but PNGs are lossless. So if you give me a PNG photo, I'm like out of here. Right. The GIF again actually can do more than 256, but again, it's a lossless format. So my personal choice is you start to cut away the lossless formats. And in fact, I'll go back to some history. When the Webp was first introduced, there was a huge argument taking place, whereas Mozilla didn't believe that we had squeezed everything out of the JPEG yet. And to their defense, that was true. And they felt that, they didn't want to give up on the JPEG, and, so much, more innovation came out of that. Eventually they came around and realized the WebP again was a good format for the internet's needs. But yeah, you need to start to chop out what it is that will never work in a disciplined manner for the image that you have. And then you work your way down in terms of like, okay, which is going to give me the best support. But at this point, support, if we have the WebP being supported across the major browsers, you might start to really battle when it comes to photography between 2 formats, which is going to be the JPEG and the WebP.
Could things like you mentioned source set earlier on, is that a good tool to lean on for not serving, I don't know, like overly oversized images where they're not necessary, and be able to just be more thoughtful about how large the assets are that go to the different kind of clients that are requesting them?
Yeah, so that whole area, it's turned into a bit of a Venn diagram, because I think you have several ways of getting that done. Some implementations are easier than others, are less tedious than others, and that's, I think, part of the challenge, right? I mean, it's like yesterday's conversation that you had with Guillermo, which I believe, by the way, should have a part 2. That was like really fascinating. It was good, like back and forth. But yeah, just like he had mentioned, there are ways of implementing some of this stuff yourself, or you know what, there's someone there's a service that's specializing in this area. So with that being said, yes, there was SourceSet. For a while, or there is for a while, I was a big fan of playing around with the sort of like network information API, where you could just pull the sort of the network and figure out what it is that's taking place, and then start serving conditionally some product. But guess what? That was a little hard to sort of like put together yourself. It's the extra little bit of code. You got to figure it out. You got to test. It's like, oh man, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's where you start to get into that decision making, like, oh, offload it.
It gets so hard, doesn't it? Because I think depending on the nature of the site that you're creating, sometimes we're creating something where we've got really strict control over it, whether that's like a campaign site or a product site for the company we work for. We've got, okay, we're making a thing, we can define everything in that. Whereas there's also sites which are very kind of content fluid, whether those are news sites or I don't know, any kind of site where people might be managing content who aren't developers. And then I guess the scenario changes a little bit, and I don't know what the right thing to do there is. I guess you have to depend on like tooling and automation to help with that, because I guess you can't have content creators need to understand different codecs and things, right?
Yeah, and that's a massive hurdle. Ilya Grigor talked about that at Perf Now in November of last year, and it is that we can sit there and talk about all these codecs and everything that they're doing as engineers, but you know what? Someone's picking up their phone. The most they want to sort of have the greatest decision they want to make is maybe high, medium, and low. That's it. How you serve that. It doesn't matter. They're not going to sit there on the subway talk about, oh man, the gall. They sent me an MP4. Like, what the hell? You know what I mean? Like, what happened to Av-1? That's not going to happen. It's essentially our duty to make sure that we deliver something that is relatively clear. And in the markets where this matters, or with people, and where this kind of like sort of like information is important. Again, low data caps. They may have had an earlier education on maintaining data than others. So they might turn images off from time to time, or they spend their entire day on low power so that there's no background fetching, and stuff like that. So it's I mean, there are a few things that they know, but for the most part, they don't want to get into the entrails.
You kind of touched on something which relates to a comment that Bash made in the chat as well, actually, about other considerations of image formats. That I must admit, this is something that's way beyond my knowledge of knowledge formats, but certainly something I think about when it comes to JavaScript. Right, we think about the size of the bundle that comes down the wire, but then there's also the amount of work that the device has to do with unpacking that, parsing it, and interpreting it, and all those things. So it is as well with different image formats, right? So some of them
absolutely
compress well, but they have a very different profile for the load on CPU for decoding it. So do you have, are there ways to understand that better, or do you have any thoughts on that in particular?
I mean, it's happening. And that's why I sort of brought up the example of YouTube, when they were experimenting with Av-1, because Av-1 at the time, actually, I'll even rewind this. One of the earliest criticisms of Webp was that it was very CPU intensive, but 10 years later, things change, and the processing power changes on all devices, but not, well, I say all devices, many devices, but not all, which was why I mentioned the idea of YouTube discovering that 1 out of 10 of their users were using something that was dated like 12 or 13 years or older. I didn't mention this, but Facebook has this library called Device Year Class. So basically, they're able to figure out how old the entrails, the sort of engineering, the CPU on a device is, because they were discovering that a 2020 low-powered, moderate phone had like 2010 specs,
Yeah.
So there was this kind of like not so much misleading element, because manufacturers did that for cost savings, right? But as engineers, you couldn't send down 2020 sort of like engineering down the pipe. You had to scale it down. So there are ways of sort of just finding out what devices you have. In fact, this API, what is it called again? The concurrent navigator dot concurrent. Anyways, you can find out like how many cores the device has, and then YouTube is starting to work with that data instead of, say, something like the media capabilities API, which has been around but has not been that solid.
Yeah, totally. So there's Anthony asked a question as well, and about where you're sourcing information from as well. How does one learn about the cool new image standards that are up and coming? I mean, it sounds like, you've obviously been up to your armpits in learning these things. So where do you learn these things from?
Do you see the dark bags here?
Oh, not at all. You look well rested.
I know, right? So honestly, I mean, I started just following a few people on the internet. I would just hashtag images, Webp, whatever, and then you start to get into this rabbit hole. But I'll say this much: I do spend a lot of time on YouTube. I think there's a lot of poorly labeled talks that will escape the best search. And then you sort of find one, you're like, wow, where has this been hiding? 10 views. And it's like the greatest information ever. So, I mean, whoever this person is, I'd be more than happy to help out. Shoot me a little message on the chat here, or ping me on Twitter, and I'll be more than happy to open up the coffers.
Excellent. Good stuff. Okay, and then let's have one final question, and
yes.
Maybe you touched on this already in some of the things in your talk, but of the things that you're seeing coming to browsers or coming to image formats, like on the horizon, is there one in particular that you think this is going to change things? This is the thing that I'm excited about and I'm waiting for.
I mean, I the Webp thing is interesting, simply because I think I tweeted out today too, is that the 4-year anniversary of the Safari slip up, where they added Webp support, then pulled it the same week and probably fired someone, that happened. The Webp is an interesting one, and I'll tell you why again, because Google adopted it early. Firefox refused to provide support, and they, like I said, there are several discussions about it, a couple long blog posts, and then they came around, and then suddenly Edge came around. Then it was like this domino effect. And if Cornell's sort of prediction holds true, that there's a possibility of just having the one format, that'll be interesting to see, because it may sort of provide a lot of relief to what is taking place right now. So, I mean, that has me curious, but obviously some of the more experimental ones as well. But I think the Webp one it will be a bit of a victory lap. And I'll say this one, just to end it. There was a time where about 4 years ago, Webp still virtually unknown. Google believed that the Webp was essentially set to replace the PNG, because feature for feature, the Webp was right there and was much better. but it just never really caught on, right? So, but I remember having a conversation with a Chrome PM hallway track. Remember those? And he said, yeah, I mean, we're keeping our eyes on the PNG because I think that could, those days are numbers. So I thought that was interesting.
Interesting. Henri, let's close it there. Thanks so much for a wonderful talk and for indulging us in some Q&A as well. It's nice to get to chat with you and see your smiley face. So I think everyone in the chat will join me in thanking you ever so much for a great session. It's much appreciated.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and I look forward to joining everyone else for the rest of the day.
Awesome. Okay, thanks so much. Talk soon.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Take care.
Bye.